Hello and welcome to your next lesson. In Module 1 we were looking at autopilot, and over this last week you may have started to notice some of your own autopilots around the way you think or respond to situations. One particular autopilot that we're going to look at this week is rooted deep in the human brain. It's the way the brain itself is wired to relate to the world. And it explains why we have a tendency as human beings to focus more on bad news and on the risk of things going wrong, rather than focusing and celebrating all the things around us which are maybe going right. Why is it that our news is always about things which are upsetting? Why do we not have a news program which simply shows half an hour of people being generous and kind and supportive? Well, this is rooted in the way the human brain works. Russ Harris, who wrote the book The Happiness Trap, describes the brain as a don't get killed mechanism rather than a be happy mechanism. The human brain is evolved from millennia of looking out for danger. So if we go back to our ancient ancestors, if we go back to the mammals that preceded humans, the little mammal that was sitting there with its nut in the sunshine, giving it, smelling it, rolling it in its paws, noticing the colours, tasting it, well, that got eaten. The predator came down and grabbed it. The little mammal that was sitting there, half in the shade, half hidden, looking around, the danger, taking a little bite, looking around, taking another bite, looking around for more danger, taking another bite, seeing a shadow running. Well, that's our ancestor. And we inherit that whole lineage of beings that have learned to survive by looking out for danger. So our Stone Age ancestors, again, having to be wary of the risks all around them, from predators, from animals, from just the hardship of that life. So we now have what is termed a negativity bias. Our brain is biased towards noticing what is negative, what is a threat. And our brain is constantly looking to see, is there something around me which is potentially going to be life-threatening or not? It was Dr. Rick Hanson who developed this concept of the negativity bias. And he talks about how the brain relates to unpleasant events like Velcro. The brain wraps around the unpleasant event and holds it tight, remembers it, goes back over it, wonders how things might have been different or how we could do them differently in the future. And so I'm sure you maybe all have memories from the past. Maybe you remember that time you made a fool of yourself at school or at university, or your first day in the job. And these things can really stand out in our mind as if they're still here right now. Whereas a pleasant event, we know we had lots of pleasant events at university or at school, or as we were starting out in our career, lots of moments of laughing, feeling at ease, being welcomed. But our brain doesn't remember those. Because the pleasant events are like Teflon. It's like butter rolling off a pan. A pleasant event happens, the brain assesses it, this isn't going to be a threat to my life, and so it's let go of. So the thing with really registering pleasant events is we need to learn how to pay attention to a pleasant event as it's happening, and then really holding it in our attention. It takes about 15 seconds of really focusing and registering a pleasant event for it to go into our long-term memory. Whereas an unpleasant event will go into our long-term memory bank immediately. So the way our brain works means that we don't take a pleasant event and store it in our memory unless we consciously pay attention to it. Whereas we will remember it if it's an unpleasant event without any effort. So what this means is if you are noticing pleasant events in your life as you go through your day, in order to really register it, you need to then spend 15 seconds feeling how it is in your body, feeling what's happening in your body as a response to the pleasant event, noticing your thoughts. So maybe let's try that, thinking back over today. And is there a pleasant event that you can remember from today? What perhaps is there that comes into your mind? Maybe you had a pleasant conversation with a friend, over the phone or by text. Maybe you had a moment of there being sunlight coming in through the window, or you went for a walk and you heard some bird song, or you had some good news or a pleasant experience during the day. Whatever it is, just seeing if you can bring that pleasant event in, closing your eyes for a moment. And now for 15 seconds, really staying with that and seeing how many breaths it takes to sit for 15 seconds. So just as you notice the pleasant events, taking a breath in and breathing out, and counting how many breaths there is in this 15-second period. Okay, so that's around 15 seconds. Now, you can roughly gauge that it's around 5 breaths, 4 or 5 breaths. So every time a pleasant event happens to you that you really want to register and take in and put into your long-term memory, stopping or spending that 5 breaths of really taking it in, really feeling it in the moment, feeling how your body is, noticing what you're thinking about the event and what the emotions are. And this will be a practice we'll be doing during this week. When I talk about the home practice in the final lesson, we have an exercise each day for really breaking that down a little bit and really registering the pleasant events that you are noticing in your day. So let's have a little look in more detail at the negativity bias and how it impacts on us. So negativity bias impacts on us in terms of motivation. We are primed to avoid what we find unpleasant. It might sound quite obvious, but the negativity bias means that if we're given a choice between something which feels unpleasant and challenging, but would actually improve us, improve our situation, and something that just feels familiar and comforting, but actually doesn't improve our situation, we'll go with the thing which is familiar and comforting. And so this will play out, whether we're wanting to go to the gym, lose weight, improve our job. We'll stay with the thing that feels familiar rather than move into the realm of the unfamiliar, which feels like a threat. So we're actually primed to respond more to the perception of threat and pleasure. And that's why it can be so hard to motivate ourselves to move into something new. An aspect of this is that we respond much more to bad news than to good news. So research actually found that we register bad news and give more significance to bad news than good news. So as I mentioned earlier, that's why the evening news is all about all the bad things that are happening around us. We hear good news and we just register, well, that's good, oh great, no one's died, everyone's happy, fine. I don't really need to pay too much attention to that. But it means that we get drawn more and more into hearing bad news. So in the past, we would hear news from someone who was relaying it from a distance. We would hear what had happened in the neighbouring valley or a few valleys down, and we'd hear that there's an illness, or the crops are failing, or there's a flood. And things which would be quite immediate and would mean something to us and our living environment where we are. And so we need to then take action on that. There's been a flood, the crops have all been washed away. We're maybe going to have issues around having enough food for the year ahead, and now we take action on that. But now our news is coming from all over the world. And because we're primed by the negativity bias to find bad news, the people who are making the news are simply following that programming of their brain and finding all the bad news they can bring to us from everywhere around the world. And then we listen to the news and we don't just hear what's happened in the neighbouring valley, we hear what's happened thousands and thousands of miles away. And of course, as a human, we can feel compassion for people who are suffering, yes. But as we listen to the news of an earthquake somewhere, a drought, a disaster, we tend not to go into simply feeling compassion for the people who are suffering, but we go into that flight, stress response because we're hearing something or seeing images which, to our reptilian brain, tells us that there's a threat or danger. And so then our sense of stress levels rise, and we live in this world where we feel we're constantly being threatened, even though our immediate circumstances may actually be quite safe and secure. And if we were simply in that world of hearing what was going on in the next valley, we'd just be thinking, well, it's a sunny day, the crops are growing, everything's fine. And we would go day by day feeling everything was fine, only hearing the bad news when we need to act on it. So one thing we can do to boost our sense of mental well-being is limiting the amount of news we're listening to. Maybe only listening to the news when we need to, or at a fixed point in the day with a rolling news media. It's like we can tune into the news whenever we want now and be exposed to all the sense of threat and danger and disaster. So yes, we can be informed, but maybe we limit the amount that we're taking that in. And then there's meeting new people. So when we meet new people, we're primed to pay more attention to the negative adjectives we might hear about someone than the good. So if someone's telling you about this new person in the office, or someone who's just moved into the apartment block, and they say a couple of negative things about them, and then sort of give a positive roundup of them and say, well, they're okay, but you know, they have been a bit this and that. Well, our mind will immediately go to the negative and focus on that, and then that will shape our impression of them. And it can then take some time of actually meeting the person and really allowing that first impression to shift. So that's another way the negativity bias can really shape our impression of new people very quickly. We'll tend to focus on threats more than on the positive. And so as we go through our day, we're primed to be noticing this sense of danger. And then that triggers a fight or flight response in our brain. And then that releases cortisol and adrenaline. And so by the end of the day, we've got this sense of being really hyper because we're full of cortisol, adrenaline, all the sense of danger that we've perceived during the day. We arrive at work, a colleague has a look on their face that we then interpret, well, are they angry with me? A partner says something a little bit brusque, a little bit sharp, and then we immediately interpret that. Are they annoyed with me? Is there an issue? What's going on here? And then so we keep focusing on what seems to be a threat. And then our world becomes a world that is almost entirely one of threat rather than pleasure. So the strongest element of the way this negativity bias works out within our mind is rumination. And rumination is this tendency of the mind to bring in thoughts that we've thought before and chew them over. So rumination is what cows do. They swallow their food down, it goes into one of their stomachs, they bring it back up, they chew it again, they swallow it down, they bring it back up. And we do the same with thoughts. So ruminative thoughts are thoughts which are not new, they don't make us feel any better, and they don't lead to any outcome or conclusion. So they're really not serving us. They just mean that we'll think over, why did I do that? What was that person meaning when they said that? We'll keep reading into it, and then we'll start mind reading or fortune telling or catastrophizing. And so rumination really doesn't serve us. It's not a helpful way of thinking. And in relationships, this tendency to focus on the negative means that after a while, after we've had a few negative interactions with our partner over the years, we'll have a tendency to focus more on that negative expectation. We'll be thinking that when we raise an issue, that they're going to argue about it, or they'll be difficult. And if we have had an argument with a person we're close to, a person we're in a relationship or a friend, the negativity bias means we'll tend to then focus on all the negative things about them. As soon as we've in that space of having an argument with them, when we're thinking about them, we won't remember the positive things so easily, but we will focus on, well, yes, they said that and they said that and they behaved like this, and well, I never really liked them anyway. And we end up focusing on all these negative things, and then that becomes our perception of the person. And that can really undermine the dynamic of closeness that can go on in a relationship when we then keep focusing on the things that we find to be of fault. Whereas the positive things, the helpful things that they have done, we just easily forget those. Now, how do we work with negativity bias? The first thing we can do is stop the self-talk. So saying stop. It can be as simple as just saying stop. You might even like to imagine the voice of the worry and the noting all the negative things that are going on as being like this little worry monitor coming along with their clipboard, and they've got all their stuff. It's like, well, there's this and there's that and there's this. And then we turn to them and just go, no, stop, stop, enough. Every time that chatter comes into your mind and you notice yourself being pulled into rumination, self-criticism, criticism of someone else, simply saying stop, enough, and seeing what happens if you start to make that a new habit, rather than simply being washed along on that wave of rumination, judgment, criticism, focusing on the negative in a situation. This is something I found to be really powerful, just simply that act of saying stop, enough. I was walking with a friend once around the lake, and I'd arrived late, and my inner critic was telling me that my friend was, he would never want to arrange to meet up with me again if I didn't show the respect that I could arrive on time for him. He was just going to dismiss me. And it was a beautiful day. It was a sunny day. The water was glistening with the sunlight on it. We were having a really pleasant conversation. And all I could hear was this chatter in my head telling me, I failed. I'm going to be judged as not good enough, a bad friend. Unfortunately, we are close enough that I was able to say this, and he's a therapist, and we will have these conversations about what's going on for us and what's happening in our inner world. And so I said to him, it's really weird. I'm really enjoying being here with you, and it's such a lovely day. And then all I can notice is this chatter in my head telling me this. And he smiled and he said, well, no, honestly, it's like, it was fine. I just enjoyed being in the sunshine for a while until you arrived. I would have said if I was upset. And then he said something which has stayed with me ever since, and I share, and people have found very useful in their own process. He said to me, just tell that voice, take a break. You've worked hard enough. You've been working so hard all this time. It's time to take a break now. And it's like, oh, wow, yes. Oh, what a relief. So that's something else you might like to try, simply telling that voice, that aspect of your mind, you take a break. Just take a break. You've worked hard enough. So that's the first thing we can do. We can simply say stop. We can reframe the situation. So reframing doesn't mean denying what's going on, but it does mean we can look at the overall picture and consider, well, is it the case? Is this catastrophizing doomsday scenario? Is that actually how it is? Or is there another way that I could see this? So maybe I messed up in the meeting. I forgot what it was I had to say. And then the impact of that is I'm remembering it, I'm feeling embarrassed, I'm thinking, oh, my colleagues think I'm ridiculous. And then instead we can say, well, what do I take away from this? It's like, this has happened. I can't change the fact that that's happened, and it does feel embarrassing and it's unfortunate. So I just acknowledge that. But what do I take away from this? Well, okay, well, I recognize that I'm not going to remember what I need to say unless I have some notes. So when I go into a meeting in the future, I'm going to write some notes down and be prepared to turn to my notes, and that it's okay for me to have notes to use in my meeting. That was one example. There may be other things where you can reframe it, where you simply remind yourself it's okay to get things wrong sometimes. And no one in this world is perfect, and we learn by making mistakes and building from that mistake. So Jung says, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. So this can apply both to when we're thinking back to our past and thinking, well, this and that happened to me in the past and that's why I am as I am now. Well, yes, that's true. And I then bring a conscious awareness to how I am now, and I choose, well, how do I move on from here? How do I bring healing to what needs healing? How do I build on what needs to be built on? But also in the immediacy of the moment, when we have an unpleasant experience, when the negativity bias takes over and the mind, like Velcro, wraps around the experience and takes hold of it and ruminates about it. And then we have both the process of saying stop, but we also have this process of reflecting and thinking, okay, so I'm not what has happened to me. This is what's happened to me. But now I choose what I become in response to this situation. So that's another way of working with these experiences when they arise. And then there's establishing new patterns. So when you find yourself ruminating or getting pulled into the negativity bias, starting to build up a repertoire of things that you can do in your life which are creating new patterns. Maybe you start to go out for a walk, or you dance, or you sing a song, or you sit and read something that will sort of help you feel in a happier state of mind. You watch a comedy program rather than focusing on upsetting news. Anything which is starting to change some of your autopilots for how you relate to these things. So going for a walk can really shift your mood. But we might stay with the familiar and just sitting despondently ruminating over all the awfulness of how we made a fool of ourselves or how something went wrong. Whereas if we move, if we do some exercise, if we go for a walk, that very act of moving and shifting into a different space will very likely mean that a lot of those ruminative thoughts will just fall away. I'll be mentioning this in a future lesson in this module, but the power of going for a walk and spending time in nature can be one of the most healing things you can do for yourself. And then, probably most significantly, there's savouring the positive moment when it's there. The exercise we did earlier on, spending 15 seconds really focusing and experiencing the pleasure of that moment. Breathing into it and really fully inhabiting the experience of that pleasant moment. So that by the end of the day you can look back and you'll remember it. You won't be thinking, oh, what happened today that was pleasant? I think something nice happened, but I can't quite remember it. It will all be there because you've really spent time putting it into your long-term memory. So that's one of the most immediate things you can start to put into effect and create as a new autopilot that supports your sense of well-being and happiness. So that's been an overview of negativity bias and how it impacts on us. This brings the lesson to a close. You can read all of that information in the course notes and reflect on that a little more. And then when you're ready, moving on to the next lesson.